Let's see, the waiting room is clear. Yep, that's good. Let me introduce David. In his own words, if I'd known as a child that I was going to be a picture book writer, I certainly would have wanted to live in the Northeast Kingdom. It sounds so right, but I never had a clue about that growing up in Queens. I tell classes of students I visit, writing wasn't on the bottom of my, when I grow up, I want to be a list. It wasn't on the list. As for picture books, I didn't know much about them until I was reading to my own children. Then in 1979, while working at the Community College of Vermont, in St. Johnsbury, I told Mary, a colleague, about a vacation trip my family and I had made to New York City. She said that she and her husband couldn't leave their place because they had farm animals to take care of. From that came my book, Gator and Mary's Traveling Band. When I showed it to my friend and mentor, June Elliott, she said, I hope you're not going to be a one-book author. I hope so too, but it was 10 years before the Lizzie books came out, and now I've published many. Honestly, it's all still a surprise to me. How I came to live in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, that's a whole other story. For more information, if you read David's biography, which is on the screen here, and I'm going to stop sharing the screen in just a minute, fantastic information about all of the many other things he's done during his long career. On that site, you'll see at least 22 books that David has written. There's probably more than that number, but there are 22 on the site. The latest is The More the Merrier, which was published last June. Here is David Martin. I'm going to stop this and.
Hi, Dr. Bean sharing. Hello, it's really nice to be here. Thank you for coming. I told Bob earlier today that this was like a bookend because earlier today at 9 o'clock, I was at Newport City Elementary School presenting to kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, and fourth graders, and you know, showing my books and singing songs with them and being silly. I hope we can have as much fun. Here, by the way, that's Gator and Mary's Traveling Band. I played softball with a guy named Gator, and he was married to Mary. And that was the first book I ever wrote. So to be, as I told the kids when I wanted to be transparent to them, I said, I want to tell you the truth about me. And with them, I said, you know something, I think I'm sort of like an elephant. And then I said, and I think you're all a little like elephants too. And then I said, even your mommies and daddies and grandmas and grandpas, even your teachers are kind of like elephants. And then I sang them, I've got ears, you've got ears, elephants got ears too. What you gonna do, what you gonna do? And it goes on like that. Now I'm gonna show you that book later for another reason. But just the way Bob said, you know, I never grew up thinking I was gonna be a writer. You know, I thought I was going to be a scientist or an engineer. I was dragging televisions home with my friend Ray and taking them apart and trying to put them back together again. So I'm not going to talk a lot about, you know, each book that I did. I'm not going to talk, I'm only going to talk about me as far as it might help you. So I think the two things that the big areas that would be helpful to cover is, this is what I do before I send in a submission, and then, you know, how I go about submitting things. So I describe myself as a seat of the pants author. You know, I never had any training. English was not my strong suit. My father was an English teacher. My brother was a theater major. I was going to be, in the first grade, I was going to be a dairy farmer growing up in Queens. And then I was going to be a scientist. So, you know, how I did it, it just sort of evolved. But what I can say is that once I have an idea, I'm a very vigorous revisionist. I revise and I revise and I revise. And I don't have a routine for when I write. I don't sit down at 5 o'clock in the morning and open up the computer and wait till something happens. It happens where it happens. Gator and Mary, because I took a trip to New York. My Lizzie books, because my daughter kept taking her socks off when she was 2.5 years old, and I wanted to have warm feet, and she kept taking her socks off, and I put them on, and she took them off, and I finally gave up, and I wrote a little book that looked like this at first, except that it was actually illustrated on baker's dough, like bread dough things. And then that became actually Lizzie and her puppy and some other things like that. So my ideas come from all sorts of places. I have a book called Let's Have a Tree Party because I climbed a tree and I was surrounded by little twinkly lights, and I thought, what a great place to have a party for animals. And I went down and I wrote a song. Just like the thing that I started to sing to you before, that song actually became a book. So I have no routine, but once I get an idea, then I'm like the proverbial dog on the bone, you know, I just gnaw away at it and I revise it and I revise it. And I put it away and then I go, okay, it's done, it's perfect. And then I put it away and I come back to it a week later and I go, oh, no, you know, this isn't right. And, you know, I judge it on different things. Like I happen to write a number of books in verse. Don't consider myself a poet. What I consider myself as a person who likes to play around with words, and rhyming words are fun. And I do a lot of work with young children, and rhyming words is really good for getting young kids. It's technically phonologically aware. It's good for their reading. So that's the way things just come out sometimes. But what I know about is that I can write something and I can make it work by, you know, altering my voice or, you know, what I really know is that if a parent is going to pick up a book that's written in verse for a child, it has to be able to be read smoothly the first time. You shouldn't have to figure out, oh, here's an extra syllable, or oh, that doesn't sound right, or something like that. Somebody showed me a book the other day and they rhymed grows with toe. No, that doesn't work. Use toes, grows and toes, that works. So I try to make sure of that. And then the other thing is that once in a while, I do something and I say, okay, it works, but there's a part of me in the back of my head going, it's not quite right, you know, oh, it's good enough. No, it's not quite right. When I get that feeling, I really try to dig into it. So I do the best I can on my own, but I also have, I'm very lucky to have a very close friend, part of my extended family, Amy Ehrlich, who used to live around St. Johnsbury, who used to work at the Athenaeum sometimes, and she's an incredible writer, and she was an editor. So I get Amy to read a story, and when she reads the story to me, she's not my friend anymore. She's reading an author. So, you know, tell me, Amy, you don't have to, you know, I want to hear what you really think. And so she tells me, you know, this doesn't work. Very often when she tells me that something needs work, it means it needs to be shorter. Because those are the kind of picture books I write. I write picture books with not many words on the page. You know, like, we can kick them. That's, can you? Not many words. So if my pages, if I see that I'm writing a story, whether it's in verse or in prose, and it's seeping onto a fourth page, I go, this is too long. And sometimes I go, it's going to 3 pages. It's probably too long for what I write. There are picture books that have lots of text. Very often fairy tales that are retold have lots of text. They need to, because it's a much fuller story. I was looking at a book by Jerry Pinkham. Did I say that name right? I hope so. When I was at Newport today, and he wrote, he did a version of The Little Mermaid. There's lots of text. But my picture books are basically really basic picture books. And they're not called picture books for nothing. pictures really are, what is drawing the attention. And sometimes I think, oh, I start to think, gee, it's the illustrators get all the credit, but I realize, if I hadn't thought of this idea, if I hadn't written this line, that illustrator wouldn't have had a chance to go to town with his illustrations. So it becomes a real collaborative effort. So when I'm writing, and most of my stories are short, and as it seems that I keep getting younger and younger, I write shorter and shorter stories. I'm about to submit 2 like baby's first books. I think one of them has 107 words. One of them has 79 words or something like that. That's my style of writing, but it doesn't matter because my style is my style, and how you write, that's how you write. And there are no rules. There's no right way to do it. There's no wrong way to do it. There's no, it's what works for you. And I know that the same thing happens when you look at illustrations. I went to an exhibit of illustrations from illustrators from the Netherlands, which has a very robust picture book history. There were, probably 100 illustrations, and everyone was so different from the others. So, what works for you is all really that matters. But I know that when I listened in on the first section, which I was with Bill Schubart, did I say that name right, Bob? Nod, yes, okay. When he talked about writing, he said, you got to know your audience, which made a lot of sense. But I'm writing for 2-year-olds, not for 4-year-olds, I know them intuitively. I've done a lot of work with kids. So, my sense of humor, I sometimes tell people, leveled out at the first grade. I write books about, balloons that pop, worms that are fun to eat. Just kidding. I mean, they work for first grade kids and younger kids. But the other thing, my other audience is me. I'm my favorite reader. And, that sounds strange to say, but I want to give you a higher authority on this. E.B. White. When I first started to teach in St. Johnsbury, which was like 1980, we took our class to the children's room at the Athenaeum, upstairs at the Athenaeum. And while the kids were looking for books, I found a bin of LP records, long play records, and I was flipping through them and I found a recording of Charlotte's Web, and it was recorded by E.B. White. And he introduced it before he started to read the story. He introduced it by saying, this is Charlotte's Web. It's the story of a barn. I wrote it for children and to amuse myself. And I have never forgotten that. I I have some friends who say, writing is the hardest thing they do and they're tearing their hair. I'm not looking to do that. I write to amuse myself. I write to give myself a joyous story. So that's my audience. You have to figure out who you're writing for and do it your way. But really, there are no rules. But when you do come up with a manuscript and you want someone to read it, you really need, like I have with Amy, you really need to find someone who, if it's a friend who can really, just not worry about hurting your feelings. I mean, you don't want somebody to say, this is a piece of, but, someone who can give you some really honest feedback without trying to sugarcoat it. Because when you send it to a publisher, they sugarcoat nothing. When you send a manuscript to a publisher, it goes on something that is known as the slush pile. That's a little discouraging sounding, I know, but that's traditionally what it's called. And so you want to have it the best that you can. So that's what I do. I just try to, get it into as good a shape as I can. I don't even know, to be honest, if there's, I know when people write screenplays, there are apps that, you know, make things look like screenplays, things get centered certain way, this and that and everything. To be honest, I can't tell you if there is an official way to send in a picture book manuscript. I send it in just the way I type it. It has a title, and then I, you know, usually double space the lines, and I indent the paragraphs, and I put quotes around the quotes, and I try to catch all my spelling mistakes. And that's what it is. What I don't do is that I don't describe the story. I send the story. I don't try to explain what the pictures are going to look like. I don't divide it into pages, because if you're working with a publisher, if you're not self-publishing, and I don't self-publish, so, you know, we can talk about why I don't, and maybe you have more experience. Everybody who's self-published has more experience than me, except I took a book to Capital Copies and had them bind one for me. I want the illustrator who is going to be a professional illustrator to feel free to illustrate the book the way she or he sees it, and use, you know, their imaginations to match my imaginations, and to have it be a collaborative effort. So unless it's a really, really clear thing about how, oh, you know, if you've got to see that this is happening here, you know, I don't. I just figure that an experienced editor who looks at it will see it, and then if the book gets accepted, it'll get sent to a designer, and the designer will see, you know, have a how it should look, and it'll get discussed with an illustrator. And I like working like that. When I was in college, which was a miserable experience, but the best experiences in college is when I worked in the theater. And I love that it was a collaborative effort. And I can just even show you. So there's a book called Little Chicken Chicken, which I read today to the kids. I love to read this because it gives me a chance to be a klutzy juggler. But in the book, I'll just read, you know, the very first line. Little Chicken Chicken and Baby Chick was scratching in the garden with the other chickens. And Little Chicken Chicken finds a string and makes a tightrope out of it, and it goes on and on like that. Way towards the end of the book, after Little Chicken Chicken has saved the day because everyone's frightened about a big thunderstorm, and she saves the day by juggling these wonderful things, which included a sparkling glass bead. And little Baby Chick says, did that really come from lightning? Because that's what Little Chicken Chicken tells him. Came from, I snatched it when it came across from lightning. And Little Chicken Chicken's mother says, I don't know, go ask Little Chicken Chicken. And that's the only time in the story that I mention that little baby chick. But what the illustrator did, what Sue Heath did, was, I hope you can see this. So here's Little Chicken Chicken. She's the one with the spots, and here's Baby Chick. And so Little Chicken Chicken's found her string, and she's going to make a tightrope out of it. And she says, oh, I'm going to make a tightrope out of it. And mother says, that's nice, dear. And all the little chickens laugh at her. And I point out, look where Baby Chick is sitting, standing, and here's the other chickens who laugh at her. A couple of pages later, she finds these two round, dark stones. She says, they fell out of a thundercloud. That's why they're so dark. And all the big chickens laugh at her. So here's Baby Chick right by Little Chicken Chicken. At the end of the story, and there's another page that has that too. At the end of the story, all the young chickens think, oh, Little Chicken Chicken's really cool. We want to be just like her. And they're finding this and they're finding that and making things up. But at the end of the story, when Little Chicken Chicken goes flying off, she's holding Baby Chick in her feet, paws, claws, whatever they have. And then at the very end, she's playing with Baby Chick. Little Chicken Chicken and Baby Chick are playing together. And so when I asked the kids, when you see that, who's Little Chicken's one true friend? They all go, oh, Baby Chick. But I didn't know that was going to happen until I saw the illustrations, until I saw sketches for the illustrations. I said, wow, I never thought of that. I never thought about the Baby Chick except to stick her name in a couple of times. So that's why I really love, the collaboration. And to me, it's always been very successful. When I submit a story that's accepted, I've done it enough so that I get to have a voice in what happens with the illustrations. I'm not saying, oh, that's good, not that, this or that, but I get to put in my opinions, sometimes with who the illustrator is, and sometimes with how the illustrations are going. And once in a while, I'll see, can we try it this way? And the illustrator does. David Walker with the Little Peep Stories did that. He changed an illustration after I said, oh, can we try it this way? And it turned out better. But it goes through like a chain of command. I tell my editor, the editor tells the designer talks to the illustrator. I don't write to the illustrator and tell them. So that's why I like to work that way. But before you get to that point, you have to submit this manuscript. And I've always done it the classic way. I've sent it to an editor, and then the editor, to a Candlewick Press or Viking or Holt. Those are the three places that have published my stuff. And we start there. Nowadays, because I've submitted enough stuff, I don't send in a cover letter, and I'm not coming in unknown. But I gotta admit, because I'm very lucky, because my friend Amy, who read my manuscripts, who still reads my manuscripts, she was an editor at Dial Press at the time that I sent in Gator and Mary's Traveling Band. So she was able to get it read. And that was just a huge boost. I got back a letter saying, this sounds like a story. It sounds like a young writer. I was 36 at the time. And, suggestions, and I did some things and they accepted it. But, that was my lucky foot in the door. And I can't pretend that I sent anything to 53 publishers and got 53 rejections and then got the 54th acceptance. So taking that next step is, that's a big step if you're going to do it that way. What I can say about cover letters is that they should be pretty brief, have your basic information. They shouldn't have to describe the story. The editor, a professional editor, should be able to look at the story and say, okay, I can see what this is. I can see where it's going. This isn't for me. Yes, this is great. Or, let's think about this. Maybe you can do this. Maybe you can do that. Unfortunately, these days, publishing has really changed. So the very experienced picture book editors are kind of retiring out, and there are new ones coming along, but people who will really work with you on something, it's hard to find. And it takes, and for me too, I send in a manuscript and I don't hear anything for months. And it's very frustrating, frankly, because I know that somebody could look at the story and say, oh, and then when I hear from them, they say, no, not for us. But I know very well that that person probably could look at it for 10 minutes and decide, no, it's not for us. But there's this huge backlog, there's huge piles, and they don't get to you very quickly. So that can lead you to self-publishing, which I don't do because it's just too much for me to handle. Especially with picture books. There's so much that goes into a picture book. I mean, I don't know how to write a novel, but once you write a novel, it's all words. And the book needs design, it needs good design, there's no question about it. But with picture books, you really need, a designer, you really need to work with somebody who knows what they're doing. So when I said I'm a little like an elephant, I've got ears, you've got ears. I've got eyes, you've got eyes. And then I sing a little further and I say, we've all got, and then I wait and I tell the kids, there's a special thing that I'm thinking of that I have and you have and elephants have too, and no one can ever guess it, but maybe you will today. And I get wonderful, wonderful guesses. Some of them are like heart, brain, skin, feet, teeth. Some of them are like souls. Some of them, let's say, love. I mean, just this whole range of things. But the answer is belly buttons. We've all got belly buttons. I have to tell you something. When I taught a program called Reading Recovery, which was for working with young children, first graders who you knew right from the first day of school they were going to have a hard time learning to read. We did a certain kind of screening. And one of the things that my teacher leader taught us right away is assume nothing. Well, it's not true. Everybody doesn't have a belly button. There is a special medical situation, and I found this out 3 times when I went to read this book, that there is a special situation where you don't have a belly button, but most people have belly buttons. But my point with this is, so the book is very simple, and then we're going to get to your questions. You know, with the elephant page, it says, we've got ears and you do too. We can pull them, can you? We've got hands and you do too, and we can clap them, can you? And so it was all ready to be published. To actually, you know, had gone through, the illustrator had done his job, it's Randy Cecil, and it was all, and they sent like final gallery, and everybody's enthusiastic about this. And I looked at the final gallery and I said, this isn't working. There's something wrong here. And I didn't know what it was, but I knew it just didn't feel right. So I went to my friend Amy, and she looked at it in 5 minutes and says, yeah, it's the layout. It's how the words have to be put on what page, where, here, there, and everything like that. It was as simple or as complicated as that. So if you're self-publishing a book, you're going to have to be responsible for all of those things. And if you have a friend who is an artist or somebody that you're an artist with, I mean, you have to really be on top of all those things. And it's a lot. It's more than I wanted to handle. But I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. And Bill Schubart talked about hybrid publishers, and there's lots of good stuff that comes out these days. So I'm just saying this is the way I do it. And you should go any which way you want that works for you. What I can tell you about, one thing about cover letters, if you're a teacher and you send in something, a picture book, saying, I read this to my class and they love it, it's not going to get you very far, because the kids, of course, are going to love it, or my grandchildren love this. I mean, so just a really brief, simple, you know, this is the story, and I don't even have a formula for that, but not a long description of this has to happen, and then this has to happen, and this has to happen. That should be seen by an editor. Now you can find private editors, and you can find illustrators, and you can, you know, there's lots and lots of ways to put it together. Like I say, no rules, but the self-publishing route was just too much for me. And I'm not a great publicist. I don't want to be going around, you know, distributing my own books. Anyway, I think, one thing I will say about publishing. One is that Penguin Random House seems to own everything nowadays. Little Brown, Simon Schuster, all those old publishers, they're all under Penguin Random House nowadays. But I do have a list, and Bob said that he sent you all a list of Vermont publishers, and I have a list of other publishers around the country that are small houses. And with the list comes, you know, we publish this kind of book, we do this kind of thing, we're looking for Native American stories with, you know, it has a little stuff. So you can say, okay, that I'm not going to send to them. I'm not going to send to them, but that one looks good. So if I can dig up that list, I'll send that to Bob, and then he can send it out to you. So I think I've talked enough. Let's, and I would love, for you to say a little about what you're doing, or ask questions or anything. And if somebody asks a question and I don't have the answer, but somebody else does, please chime in and help us, because the conversation would be terrific. So thanks for
Thank you,
listening.
David.
Yep.
To facilitate this, I'm going to call your name as the way I see it on this participant list. I don't know how this got sorted, but if you don't want to say anything, I'll wait a few seconds. And if I don't hear you, just remember to unmute yourself and then remute yourself when you finish. I'd like to go through all of you who are here just to tell us who you are if you want. You don't have to speak, but and be brief, because then we'll come back to we could have a more free form conversation, as David just said. So the first person I see is Barbara Hatch.
Hello. Thank you so much, David. And thank you, Bob, for facilitating this. I think my question for you, David, is how does someone go about, should it be a concern to protect the story when you send it in? So if you have a very original idea that, you're just wanting, if you're sending it to multiple houses, how do you protect it if it's your intellectual property? Do you send it certified mail? Do you, I don't know.
Everything gets sent digitally these days, and I don't know that there's any digital certification. And I don't pre-copyright my stuff. And actually the publishing companies own the copyrights. I did read aloud videos when COVID shut down all the schools. I had to find out that I had to ask permission of my publisher to read my own story, for Pete's sakes. You have the copies, you have the dates on it. Any, any publisher who's really out there, they're not going to rip you off. They're not going to say, oh, this is great. And then you see it 3 weeks later or 3 years later, and, and it's a bestseller. If it's if it's a decent publishing house, they're not looking to rip you off, because if they do, they'll never get another piece from you. Mm-hmm. So it's, I don't think that's a real worry. I don't know about sending to smaller groups, but I haven't had to been very careful about it. And I think the only one that I sent in with an actual envelope and stamp was Gator and Mary's Traveling Band.
I'm muted here, sorry. Forget how to do this myself. Beth Meacham, I see you next on the list.
I thank you for sharing your personal experience, David. I really don't have any questions. I'm at the beginning stages of trying to put a story together that will be historical fiction in a picture book format. And I think the thing that I struggle with the most is how to keep my word population down so that it becomes readable and isn't too full of text. And that's kind of where I'm stuck right now. So I'm at the beginning.
So it reminds me, actually, so you're writing basically historical fiction picture books, nonfiction, or they're fiction, but they're historical fiction. That certainly, not having too much text can be a problem, but I think that what I didn't mention the first is that when I write something, I really try not to edit myself as when I start to write it. I just write it, let it come out, and you find out that you have an idea that you didn't even know was there or something. So especially in the very beginning, just write whatever comes to you, because you can always cut it back. And what age you're writing for depends on how much text it's going to be. And, you know, there's so many factors. But if you're just really getting the story going, I would just write it and see what comes out. You might find that you're not writing a picture book even. You might find that you're writing a chapter book. Who knows? But just let it come out and see where it goes.
Dan Close, you're next. And from all of those famous press conferences with the governor, *6 to unmute. That's not actually what happens here, but just want to give you, Dan, time to unmute yourself and ask, or I'll go on and come back to you. Okay, Deb McDougall, let's try you, because we never know if we're having technical problems or not.
Yeah.
Hi there. Thank you very much. It's been very informative, and I'm still at the very beginning stage, so I just am gathering information. So thank you.
Gathering information about what?
What
About
to
what
do.
you want to write about, or?
No, I have some ideas of what I want to write about, just the next steps on what to do, and this has been helpful. Thank you.
Good. All right. Enjoy it.
Thanks.
Thank you, Deb. Jill Minkoff, you're next.
Hi. So I wrote a children's book about 25 years ago and was told by a friend who did a lot of reading of children's books at a local bookstore that it had too many words. And so I put it on a shelf and didn't look at it for a long time. Recently, since I now have quite a group of my own grandchildren, I thought I would try it out on them. Before I did that, though, I went back. It's written in rhyme. It's about kind of personification of parts of a car coming together so they can do more together. I went through and made everything gender neutral, and which was a challenge in keeping the rhyme going. But I've tried it with my local grandchildren who are ages 2.5 up to almost 6 years old, and they love it. So it's not too many words. I've done some simple sketches just to give some visual to it. And I'm ready to take that next step of either, you know, trying to find a publisher, self-publishing, whatever. So I don't have any specific questions. I think you've given me some guidelines and insights from what I've heard already.
So that's great. That's really great that your grandchildren love it. You know, no matter what happens to this thing, there's a book that I don't have here. It's called Skelly's Halloween. It started off as Skelly's Apple, and it's because my daughter wrote that her son Graham, who was about 4 at the time, he was skeleton everything. He had skeleton gloves, he had skeleton this, he had skeleton socks. But she couldn't find a decent skeleton book. And I thought, there's no skeleton book? Are you kidding me? So I wrote Skelly's Apple, and that turned into Skelly's Halloween. And it's about us. You were talking about car parts that put together. This is about poor Skelly goes out and tries on a costume so he can go trick-or-treating, gets blown up into the air, and he falls to the ground, and he falls to pieces. And he doesn't know how to get put back together again. So along comes a snake, and it's like, oh, I can help you. And he puts Skelly together, and it looks like a snake. And he says, no, this isn't right. And then comes some ants, and they put him together, and he's got 6 legs. And then comes a chicken, and he ends up looking like a chicken. And finally, some kids come along, and one of them actually has a skeleton costume, and they say, oh, we know how to do it. We'll make you look like me. And they put Skelly together, and they go trick-or-treating, of course, singing trick or treat, smell my feet, give me something good to eat. But that was for my grandkid. And then it turned out to be a book. I credit him in the flap copy. You know, it probably, I mean, if you have somebody who is still reads a lot of children's books, and, you know, just to give you just another adult second opinion. I mean, my problem is sometimes it's like, I know kids would like the stories, but it's the adults who read the stories and the adults who, buy the stories. What was I going to say? But so how to submit it. So one thing is that you can look around, you can go to we have a local bookstore in Lyndonville and in St. Johnsbury too. And you can look or go to the library and go through picture books and see if you find a publisher who's publishing things that are, maybe in that category. So maybe that's a good way to go. But the other problem these days is that first of all, a lot of places do not take, what's the word? Basically unrequested submission.
Unsolicited?
Excuse me?
Unsolicited?
Thank you. Right. But a lot of them also won't take submissions unless it comes from an agent. And how do you find an agent? I'm lucky. My other friend, Joe, is an agent, and he did Gator and Mary's Traveling Band, but mostly he just does the financial stuff. So how do you find an agent? Well, I think there are ads and writers' guides and all this kind of stuff. But the one way I thought that you could try, and some people have sort of a sneaky workaround, is if you find a picture book that looks like, oh, this is in somewhat the same ballpark, and you write to the company and you say, oh, I'd like to talk to this person. Can you give me the name of his or her agent so I can get a hold of the author? And then you've got the name of the agent. So, you can try it that way, and then you can submit it to the agent. But other than that, it doesn't sound like you're jumping into self-publishing the book. But if nothing else, even on a handmade, simple level, do it for your grandkids, and then work on the rest. But the other thing about submitting stuff is once you submit it, it's a long wait. Just if you got another idea, just get the idea, because if you're sitting around waiting and waiting, you're not going to get anywhere. So send it off and on to the next thing if you have a next thing. So that's what I have to say. But I wrote a book that never got published, about a car that kept falling apart. It was leaving its pieces all over the place. Didn't go anywhere.
Mine's going and finding the pieces personified and getting them back together.
Probably a more positive view. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Jonna Kendall or Jonah Kendall. Sorry, just tell me how to
No,
say your
it's
name.
Jonna. No
Okay.
worries. No.
Good.
First, thank you so much for having this. I honestly have been so excited about just this whole opportunity. So I actually have been working on a couple different books, and I have sent out two to different publishers, and one I actually am working, I use the term working very loosely, but I sent one of my books to a publisher called Ethicool in Australia, and they got back to me, and I'm actually gonna be working with a professional editor because I'm not a professional editor, and hopefully that will work out for me. But I think that my biggest reason for really wanting to be a part of this is just for that extra inspiration, because who knows, it's like somebody could take a look at it and they could still decide to not go with it. And I have sent the same story out to a couple different publishers and gotten that, like maybe next time, maybe like, don't let this get you down, try somewhere else. And I just really wanted to be a part of this, see if I could get any little gems to kind of keep pushing myself forward. I tend to be pretty optimistic, but the rejection letters certainly don't feel fabulous, I'll tell you that. But yeah, I just want to keep on kind of keeping on and keep on moving forward. And so this has just been really helpful, just hearing some of the different advice. And especially I wrote down specifically, like 53, like you could get 53 rejections, right? But maybe that 54th, that could be the one that is like, yeah, we're really interested in working with you. So yeah, I'm excited. I'm just really, really excited. I just think this is so awesome that we have this opportunity to talk to both of you, and just to kind of give us that little spark that can kind of light that fire and keep us going. So really, thank you so much.
Well, I'm just picking up on your excitement. I think that's wonderful. And I think that helps us all. I don't write, I don't have a book writers group that I work with. I tried it once, it didn't particularly work. I don't do it that way, but I know people who do. And I think that feeds energy also. It's great that Australia got back to you, and they do have books in Australia for sure. Books get sent around the world. So that you even got back from them. The 53, by the way, I think if I remember correctly, it was Jerzy Kaczynski had written some book, and and literally it got turned down so many times, then it became a bestseller. And then somebody else, and it might have been him trying another joke, took the first chapter or something out of some classic bestseller, but a classic book, typed it up, sent it in as a manuscript, and it got rejected all over the place, because it didn't have that famous author's name on it. So, but I'm glad you're excited. It sounds like you have a good time with it. Keep it up.
I definitely do. So thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
David, I'm going to ask a question for Linda Ide. It's in the chat. She says, I'm interested in illustrating my own work, but I've heard publishers don't like first-time authors to do that. What do you say about that?
I say generally that probably is true. I also say there's no rule, if you want to do it, you can do it. Sometimes you might find that they like the story, but don't like your illustrations. Sometimes they may say, hey, we like your illustrations, but the story isn't for us. Would you consider illustrating something else? So, I think you just have to go with your gut. And if you really want to illustrate your own book, you could just give it a try, or you could send in a manuscript without you. And if it gets accepted, you could say, now here's the art that I've done for the book. But I know that, I'm a pretty good artist. I'm not a trained artist. And I did illustrate one series of books that were called Brand New Readers. It's in my website. And this was Lucy and Bob, they're two frogs. And for some reason or another, Candlewick Press, I had done a whole bunch of these Brand New Readers. They were for kids who were just ready to read on their own. And I had sort of started the series with them from this reading recovery training I had done in St. Johnsbury. And then I worked with them. And so I sent in Lucy and Bob, and I sent in these really crude sketches. And they said, well, why don't you illustrate it? I have no idea why they decided to say that, because they had really never seen any finished art from me. And I learned from that I really don't want to illustrate my own book, because it's bad for the household. I'm really happy to send to do like rough sketches and quick drawings and things like that. But when it came to like doing the final art, I would get really tense, and it would be really hard, and it wasn't worth it. Hold on, I'll be right back. This is big, so I don't know how much of it you can see, but it's called If There Be Dragons, and it's a poster that I made. And I did the art. If there be dragons, it's scary or fun to see where they live. If you're lucky, meet one. If there be dragons, do they tumble and play or sit in the trees and read all day? Maybe I'll see one breathing real fire and flapping their wings, flying higher and higher. And it goes on like that. And at the very end, if there be dragons, we know what we'll do. If there be dragons, we'll be dragons too. So this is the classic. I was sitting in the Bagel Depot in Lindenville early in the morning on a brown paper napkin. I got this idea for this thing and I wrote it out, and I made it a little more formal. I sent it to a friend and she says, oh, my granddaughter Zith is going to be 3 years old. I want you to do it as a poster for me. Well, I'll tell you, I never worked so hard in my life doing a piece of art. So I was very, I was happy to do it. I'm glad I do it, but it's just too much for me. But the other thing is that, and I'm not saying you should or shouldn't do it, believe me, but I know my art. And then I see, what a professional artist, a professional illustrator did with my words. And it's like, oh, I couldn't have done that. I wrote a story called Let's Have a Tree Party after I climbed a tree and saw all these lights and thought it was a good, maybe I said this already, place to have a party, came down, wrote a song, turned it into a book. And I could never have illustrated that. And when the company asked me, it was Candlewick, if I had any ideas for illustrations, for illustrators, all I said is, I want somebody who can do exuberance, because it's really about this huge party. And that's what he did. So, but, I wouldn't discourage you from doing it, but it is chancy. There's no question about it. So, but good luck with it. Follow your bliss, follow your heart,
Just looking at the list, there was someone here who I don't see now. I'm going to go to the next person I see. Sonia Shear.
I don't.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
So I do have a manuscript that I've written and revised and feel ready to send out. And you mentioned kind of submitting to an agent versus submitting directly to a press. Does that depend on the size of the press? Are smaller presses in general willing to accept manuscripts from writers, or is it better to seek an agent first in any case?
Honestly, I don't know. My guess is you'd have a better shot with a smaller agent, with a smaller house, but I really don't know. I think that gives it a certain credence, but yeah, I'm sorry, I really can't answer that. But even smaller presses might say, no, it has to come from an agent. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't be much help there. Send it in both ways.
Okay.
It's accepted.
Thank you so much.
For sure, but good luck with it.
Thank you.
What's it about?
So it's called The Owl Song, and it's it's hard to describe a story I've written, but it's told from a perspective of an owl who ends up, he's in this tree and the tree gets cut down and taken somewhere. And so it's his experience when this happens.
Does he go, the tree gets cut down, he goes with the tree?
Yeah, and I was inspired by kind of real life story.
Good luck with it.
Thank you.
Owls are very popular with kids.
Okay.
Yeah.
Susan Melcher, you're next.
Thank you. I think you answered my question in that I've been trying to go at this. I started one book and handed it off to friends, and they said, Susan, do you understand? This is a book for adults, not for children. So I let that one go by the wayside and started another book. Two friends, their two daughters. These kids do amazing things. So I thought this would make a great book. So I've got a title, I've got an illustrator, but I sit down and I know what I want, but then I start and I stop and I'm like, no, the kids aren't going to understand that. Let me try it this way. But I don't think I'm getting the point across. And I think when you said you just got to sit down and just write it out, let it flow, and then go back and worry about all that later. So I think that's what I need, because so many people are after me. Susan, have you done it? No. I've thrown it in the corner and I don't want to go near it.
None of their business. I mean, there is a funny, first of all, I think once I tried to write sort of a chapter book, and it was called Joey the Marathon Mule. That's sitting God knows where. And I tried to write something else once. I have not written anything for, that has really like chapters in it and things like that. I have friends who write novels, and I look at them and say, I have no idea how you do that. And then I show them, some book that I did, and they go, I have no idea how you do that. But the thing is that writing, and I'm not just the person who thought of this, writing is this kind of magical thing that when you write, you start to think of things that hadn't occurred to you before. Like I'm walking, down the street, and I'm thinking of the story, and I'm thinking of all this stuff, and sort of it's written in my head, but when I start to write it, it comes out differently. And just things get added, things go in different directions, and it's kind of interesting. And personally, I can't remember if I mentioned it, I write in longhand, partially because I can do it anywhere. I can be sitting in the kitchen, I can be sitting in the living room, but there is also something about, I think, for me at least, the muscular movement connected to the brain. And by the way, cursive writing is supposed to be very good for the brain, but we don't teach cursive writing much these days. But there is some kind of muscle brain connection. So yeah, just let it spew out and see where it does. And if the book that you wrote is the first one is not for children, it's for adults, maybe that's a book to work on too. But good luck with that.
Thanks.
Tanya Souza, you're up.
Okay. Thank you for being here.
Sure.
I have published some works with small publishing companies, and that has gone a little bit, I don't know if I want to say well, because and I don't want to talk them down, but there have been some financial issues with some of the small publishers I've worked with. That have left me rather afraid to deal with them again, small publishers again. So I'm interested in seeing how it would go with a larger publisher, but my issue is somebody had asked about unagented material. And I guess, by the way, they have lists online of publishers that take unagented material. So if you want to just look that up, you can find a list. But some of the larger publishers like Candlewick that I would love to approach don't take unagented material. And I have found that getting an agent is almost as hard, if not harder, than finding a publisher, because I found publishers, but not agents. So I don't know if you have any, and it sounds like you didn't use an agent. You didn't need that because it worked for you. Lucky, I'm very happy for you that it worked for you a different way.
Yeah.
Do you have any word on that?
Yeah, right. I was very lucky. I mean, I sent Gator and Mary in, and Amy was working at Dial at the time. I sent other things. I think some things have been sent. Joe, who is my main agent, had assistants, and so I would send a manuscript to them twice, actually. I sent a manuscript to one of them, and he sent it out, and it got picked up. And I sent another one to a woman, Helen Sweetwater, and she's actually the one who sold Skelly's Halloween. So I don't have the answer. And you're right. That's what I have heard. Finding agents is very, very difficult. I'm curious because it might be useful for us to hear, and you don't have to name the publisher or anything, but to hear what actually went wrong. I mean, I know that there are vanity presses that, you pay them, they'll publish, and you come up with $10,000 or $5,000, whatever it is, and they'll do this and they'll promise all sorts of things. And some of them are probably pretty reputable and some of them are not. And then, Bill Schubart talked about hybrid publishing, but I'm curious because it might be useful for everyone else to hear, just in general, what did happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, with one of the publishers that actually contracted, it was not a vanity press that contracted with two of my books, my novels, actually. I had a contract to be paid. They were going to have their expenses paid off, and then I would get, a pay after that, which was fine because I'm an unknown. And they ended up constantly sending me, statements saying they hadn't sold books. And I knew people buying the books. So I ended up having to talk to a lawyer that specializes in literary issues. And she agreed that they were, I was getting, hate to use this word, but I was getting screwed over very badly, and that it couldn't have been true, but it would have cost me more money to go after them than to just let it go. So what I ended up doing is at least letting the publisher know that I knew people had ordered books, that I'd been consulting with a lawyer, which is not my nature, but I had. And then what they agreed to do was sell me at, basically printing cost, the rest of my novels. So I have those now. And anyway, it was like a wonderful book that has, 5-star ratings and could have gone somewhere, and it would turn very bad.
Yeah.
So I don't want that to happen again.
No, that sounds awful. That sounds like a real
It was
rip-off.
awful.
Because now you probably can't go to another publisher with that book and see whether they will take it, or I don't know what you would do with that, except, I hope you don't have a garage full of books.
I'm just selling them slowly, and on my own. But as far as my picture books, which I also do picture books, and that hasn't been as awful a thing, but I would like to next time go with a reputable publisher, a larger publisher, and see if that goes any better. But it's almost impossible to get seen.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm not quite sure what to do with that.
Yeah. I know that the list that I said I could send Bob comes from an association at CBC, Children's Book something or another. I mean, it's a reputable organization that actually sent out this list to librarians so that they could look at the list and say, okay, because we have a hole in our collection and we need these kind of books, and maybe this publisher is publishing these kinds of books. So it was sent out by somebody who, or some organization that was dealing with libraries. So my great trust with libraries and faith in libraries, I assume that's, and Bob nods. That's, probably a legitimate list, but that's awful. My only experience on a very small scale, but I didn't want it to happen, is that I had hooked up with Highlights magazine in an odd way through some workshops and thises and that's, and I got to know them a little bit, and I sent in a little poem called Skin, a very short poem, and they liked it, and they were going to publish it, and they were going to give me $75, and they were going to own the copyright forever. And I said, for $75, nobody's owning any copyright forever. I mean, no way that's going to happen. But I certainly didn't experience what you experienced, and I'm really sorry that you did. And the only way maybe you can find an agent by doing my sneaky little backdoor method.
That was a really great idea, by the way. Thank you for mentioning that.
Let us know if it works.
Okay.
And the other thing is I guess you could literally, if you see a picture book and it's written by somebody that has a website, you could say, it's a wonderful book, blah, 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 blah. Would you possibly tell me who your agent is? Because and just see, maybe someone will share it. There may not be any skin off of their nose. So good luck.
Thank you.
Sure.
Let's see. Dan Close, just want to ask you one more time if you want to speak. As I said, you don't have to, but I didn't want to miss you. And you can put something in the chat if you want. I'll just wait to see if that happens. If not, at this point, I think, David, if you want to speak some more, or if you want to speak to something that you heard, if not, anybody who's there, we can go for the free form Zoom Zoom lasagna where everybody talks over each other. And I have to say, we haven't had any children and no pets. So somebody please bring on something.
Right. Yeah, I don't have anything specific more that I want to say. I'm really glad that people brought up all these points. I would just as soon, open it up to whatever. Have it just a conversation. Sure. And
If anybody wants to ask or say, please do. And we'll sort it out, talk louder or talk softer, or, we'll sort it out. We're all adults. And we'll have a beautiful moment of silence here just to see if I learned to do this, like let people decide, yeah, I actually am going to ask that question after all, or in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, we'll say goodnight. David, is that bottle behind you? Is that your artwork? Over your left shoulder.
That bottle. Yep. Yeah, I did that a long time ago.
Yeah,
yep.
Yeah, nice.
Thank you. I took an art course a long time ago with Doreen McGowan at London State College, and I loved it. And I promised, okay, after I stop taking these classes, I'm going to paint every day. Well, forget it. It didn't happen. And when I've done yoga, it's like, oh, I can do this at home by myself. Nope, it doesn't happen. No. And that may be the same with, some people for writing too, that if you know that, you're in a writer's group and you're going to show up next week and people are going to want to hear the next chapter or the next this or that, it's something it might, get you going. I'm self-motivated on some things, but not all things.
I think we've hit the magic hour.
Maybe.
Or hour and 9 minutes. So thanks everybody for coming. David, thank you so much. This was really fun. Lots of good information, and the contact information we sent to everybody, which is just Vermont-based publishers. I can't remember if they're actually, I think there's a few editors. I don't think there are agents on there, but we've tried to get only reputable information too, that's either people in this group have worked with or who they know somebody has been reputable. So you can consult that. But I think your advice, if you find something you like and you can get an email address and contact somebody to try to get a leg up, that sounds terrific. As I said, there are 2 more of these sessions. You can get to them through the Athenaeum website under the events page. If you're interested in those 2, please sign up. And on that happy note, there hasn't been a barking dog.
Let me just say one thing, which is that, I hoped that, like I said, earlier today I was at the elementary school and now I'm here, and I was hoping they would be really enjoyable bookends, and they really are. I'm only sorry that I couldn't be in person with you and have you all. I do a song called Pop Your Lips, Waggle Your Tongue. And the kids, I say, you have to do 3 things to do this song. Actually, I say, you have to do 3 things to do this song. And they say, no. And I say, okay, you're right. You got to do 3 things. And then I go, no, you got to do 3 things. You got to be able to pop your lips. You got to be able to waggle your tongue. And then you have to just do what the song tells you to do. And they stand on their feet and they flap their arms and they wiggle, 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 wiggle. So I'm really sorry I didn't get a chance to do that with you. But otherwise, this has really been enjoyed. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, David. And boy, if not for COVID, we would have been doing these live. We're going to do another version next winter into June, like 6 months of these things. And hopefully we're all going to be sitting in the same room. The one advantage, if any of you are not from around here, thanks for coming, and maybe you wouldn't have come.
Right.
So, okay. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, David.
You're welcome.